There's an odd bit of irony to television. It's a medium by which family, friends, and fans can be brought together across time and space to enjoy a show or a movie, thus uniting the people. But at the same time, watching television often substitutes substantive moments between family, friends, and fans. And this contradiction is something that I think will play a central role in Deltarune Chapter 3. Hi there everyone, Lars here from Camille's Harem. Not just a podcast by novice writers for novice writers, but also a YouTube channel by novice writers for novice writers, because writing is an adventure, it's more fun with friends. And before I go further into my theories and writing advice for this video, let me invite you to pitch your own show and movie ideas for what Kris, Susie, and Ralsei might encounter in the Third Dark World. Because, as I hope to show here, there's all kinds of potential for character insights and inventive shows to match up in this upcoming chapter. And I think that the more ideas that we share between us, the closer we will get to the truth of what we can expect to see in Deltarune Chapter 3, as far as all of the trimmings go for this new Dark World. And this will also help to keep that hype train going for when chapters 3 and 4 are released, Toby willing, next year. So, for example, you might want to write something along the lines of The Return of Susie Zilla, Part 1 or 2 or whatever you want. Once more, rising from the depths of the ocean to take another toxic bite out of the Big Apple, Susie Zilla will take no prisoners. Led by the stoic prince of the Big Apple, Kris, and their butler Ralsei join up with the hot and bothered Mayor Noel Holiday to find a way to befriend Susie Zilla before it's too late. This is a variation of the 90s Godzilla flick that Japan is more than happy to ignore. So, stuff like that. If you write that down in the comments below, I really want to hear your pitches for whatever kinds of insane stories, movies, or shows the Fun Gang is liable to come across in Deltarune's next chapter. Let's get this ball rolling. But for now, let's get on with the theory. Toby Fox said that Chapter 3 is going to be way more character-driven and oriented than story-oriented like Chapters 1 and 2. And given the way that Chapter 2 ends, this actually makes good sense. Kris opened a new dark fountain, consuming the Dreamer house and trapping themselves, Susie and Toriel, within. But the door is also open, and we know that the cops are coming, which means that Undyne is very likely going to fall into the Dark World as well. And there's even a chance for Asgore to accidentally find his way in there as well. I say that because, well, this next chapter is going to set up a moment to confront the nightmares and dark secrets of the past, specifically the Dreamer's past. We might be able to answer questions after Chapter 3, such as, why did Asgore leave the police force? Why did Toriel and Asgore get divorced? Why does Azrael's side of the room just look so amazing and Kris's doesn't? And what is going to happen with that book, How to Draw Dragons? I really do think that we're going to get some answers to these questions, and even more communicated not just through the dialogue and the reveals, but specifically through the movies and the shows that the gang is going to encounter as they battle and befriend their way through the Third Dark World. A dark world that is going to be made up of everyone's favorite television serials and films. Now, what clues do we have that indicate that it's going to be a television kind of dark world that we're going to see? And that this could very well just be the adventures of Mettaton cranked up to 11? Well, first of all, the television was actually unplugged and unused back in Chapter 1, but then it becomes a focal point at the end of Chapter 2 all of a sudden. Did Kris plug that bad boy back in earlier in order to capitalize on some greater machinations that they've been planning? Or is this thing somehow magically working when it's not even plugged in? That would be really creepy to discover, because I think that might actually be happening right here. And then, beyond just the television in the Dreamer house and whether or not it's magically on, well, we get more about films and whatnot from Susie. Susie gets to imagine herself being Susie Zilla. She even talks about this with Noelle and brings it up again with Kris when they're watching monster movies. And she comments about how it's a whole lot more fun to watch the big monster movies as opposed to watching the big human movies. Which, for Kris, since we know that they get really awkward and uncomfortable around other stuff about humans, this is something that these two can actually connect over. Big monster movies. Then, of course, there's the smiling TV screen, which has an eerie connection to the talk show aesthetic and gibberish spewing from Spamton's mouth during the pacifist-run battle. Finally, from Toby Fox himself, we get screenshots of gangster opponents who look like they've jumped right out of the 1950s. At this point, everything is pointing to a TV world. So why am I stressing this so much? Well, the reason is simple. You can learn a lot about someone based on the stuff that they watch. I have this icebreaker thing that I do at parties where I ask people that I've just met what cartoons they watched as kids. Based on that, I read their personalities. And it actually has a pretty high success rate. The reason being because the shows we enjoy and watch often usually mirror our senses of humor, our temperaments, the topics that we like to talk about, our personalities, etc. In fact, we see this reflected in what Susie talks about while watching the television. Giant monster rampaging movies. Because Susie likes action, she likes violence, and she likes big and bad things. She even was the big bad, or one of the big bads back in chapter 1. And she has revealed to Noelle that she even imagines herself as a large monster. But let's also dive a little bit deeper right here. Within the monster genre, it is not uncommon for the monster of the movie to be misunderstood by the heroes and to actually be a hero itself, and who's just waiting to be discovered, waiting to be redeemed, waiting to be loved, just like Susie was back in chapter 1. So, when we take this understanding of the monster genre of movies, shows, television, how they reflect who we are, and all of our observations of the stuff that happened within the game from chapters 1 and 2, it is highly likely that chapter 3's various adventures will be journeys through each character's favorite television shows. Now, because we have almost no clue what the real movies and shows are within the Deltarune universe, this is where we get to be creative with our speculations about what kinds of shows they are likely to run into. So let's get the easy one out of the way first. We are assured a noir about gangsters. This will likely be Undyne's favorite series. Classic noir is all about the drama, the action, the mystery, the romance of the characters involved in a perplexing crime that the normal authorities just cannot solve. Undyne herself is always after adventure, after the bad guys, the adoration, and everything that comes with the job of being a cop. A cop who, as we learn, has big shoes to fill after taking over the chief position from Asgore. Undyne personally knows this. It's like a sword of Damocles hanging over her, and the reality is that her job is not as glamorous or as heroic as she hoped. Escaping into this television series of gangsters and noir is exactly what Undyne is very likely to experience and what she herself would want. The second easy kind of show that we can peg is for, well, Susie, because she likes kaiju films. A chance for her to feel big, or a chance for her to take on the big monster, to befriend it, to feel powerful, to feel larger than life than all of the pettiness and bullying that her life has been so far. And plus, she enjoys the idea of just smashing stuff, and smashing a city would just be so cathartic. And it's just like Godzilla. Susie is a force of destruction and natural correction, a being who could be good depending on why he, or in Susie's case, she, shows up. And so through these kaiju films, through these raging monster films and shows that they could easily be a part of in this next dark world, Susie can live her fantasies of crushing whatever and whoever she wants and still be the good guy, which then again plays into the conversation that Susie and Kris had at the end of chapter 2 about, well, living dreams through the dark world. What would it be like if we could bring our friends on over there and just enjoy this fantasy that we would want to have? That's the great temptation at the end of chapter 2, not just for Susie, but also for Birdley and Noelle. So this is something that I expect will also again be played out in the Third Dark World, especially through shows and movies. But what about Kris, Toriel, and possibly Asgore? What would be their shows or movies that we could expect to see mirrored within the Dark World that could give us some insights into their characters? Well, based on what we've seen from Kris's interests, their past, and their sense of humor, it's very likely that Kris's part of this dark world will be manifested in the form of darker-themed cartoons. Kris strikes me as the type of person who would really enjoy serials like Over the Garden Wall, with its dark, folksy aesthetic and self-aware humor, and they would also probably enjoy the regular show for its snark and its cast of characters, Gravity Falls for its mysteries and insanity, and maybe even something like Murder Drones for its angsty teens and characters fighting possession and eldritch abominations, and of course, all of the knives.
Right. Tantrum.
And yet, I still feel nothing.
Honestly, though, given how we're only ever given the absolute smallest glimpses into who Kris is without the player, we will likely only get very little about Kris's favorite shows. If we do get some of that stuff, I expect it will be more referential rather than really doing a deep dive into it. I would love a deep dive, but Toby is making sure that we don't really understand Kris too well before we get much later into the story. That's kind of my suspicion right there. So then that leads me to question, well, what about Toriel? We learn from Rudy that she was really a wild animal back in college. Her more restrained, conservative ways now as an adult could possibly be a facade for fitting in within a smaller, rural community. And the fact that she was also the sheriff's wife and is one of the main teachers in hometown. She has a presence here. But she loves jokes, which is probably an outlet for her more wild side without lowering her guard and mask. And plus, everyone likes a good joke or a good pun. So then, what can we expect from Toriel's favorite shows? Well, I think it's actually very likely, there's a very good chance that rather than comedies for Toriel, that we might actually see action movies or horror movies. And I'm actually going to lean a little bit more towards horror shows for Toriel, something like The X-Files, for instance. And why do I say that? Well, because Susie and Undyne have already provided plenty of opportunities for action through their own likes. And there's going to be already tons of humor kind of laced throughout the entire series. Toby's variation of humor, or his favorite kinds of jokes, I should say. So I don't exactly expect really so much a comedy or an action for Toriel, but maybe something really more along the lines of a horror story. And I say that because it really would be shocking. It would be a bit of a twist. And plus, we know that Toby cut a certain element from the game where Kris, Ralsei, and Susie are sneaking around trying to escape from something that is finding them. This would actually fit in really well with a horror story, that they might have stepped into a horror television show, and now the big bad, the monster, the serial killer is trying to find them, and they have to creep around without getting caught. Otherwise, they're going to get chased and stabby. And really, again, I just feel like this would be an excellent revelation for Toriel, that she loves these kinds of movies and that she's kind of been suppressing that, which would then actually communicate a whole lot about her character, why she acts the way that she does, the chance that there really is a facade, a mask that she's wearing, and it would also mean that, well, there's some real massive miscommunication happening between all of the different people. If Kris doesn't know this about their mom, then really, how strong is their relationship? There'll be that question thrown at us, where that will be some drama and an obstacle that the heroes will have to overcome. There's a whole lot that you can do with this, and horror especially. The genre of horror is actually all about taking problems from real life and cloaking them in something truly horrifying and mysterious, which then challenges the hero to not just simply survive, but to uncover the nexus, the core of this problem, and try to solve it. That's actually at the heart of most of the horror genre. Lastly, we have Asgore. Now, he might not appear in this chapter, but I have 2 reasons to suspect his addition within chapter 3. First, we know that Susie's comments to Kris after the core events of chapter 3 are about how messed up their family is. And that would make the most sense if Susie's also seen more of Toriel and Asgore, and not just their interactions at the store, and then just Toriel figuring out more about her within chapter 3. So there's a very good chance that Asgore is going to play a much larger role in this as well, that Susie will then be able to observe. Second, while Undyne is the new chief of police, she respects Asgore. If there is a problem at his old house involving his family, she could very well ask him to assist in dealing with whatever's troubling his ex-wife and their adopted child. And of course, if anyone asks him to even help Toriel, we know that this poor guy is going to drop everything and bend over backwards just to be there for her. Therefore, should Asgore arrive in chapter 3, what shows might we see for him? The answer, my dear friends, is romantic comedies. This big guy is a hopeless romantic with a bad sense of humor. Yep, this fits him perfectly. It would be a reflection of his desire to reconcile with Toriel, and it would be the perfect setting to drop a hilariously awkward bomb like Susie discovering how to draw dragons. Because that book just keeps popping up and keeps getting teased in all of the chapters leading up to this, which I know is only 2 chapters, but hey, it's significant when a joke keeps on reoccurring. And it would be hilarious if this book isn't a coloring book, but a steamy romance novel, now turned into your favorite adult show. That would explain Bertley's mocking attitude towards Kris about the cover. And then Susie and Kris find themselves in the HBO adaptation, unrated. But really, it would be something just so sticky sweet that would grate on everyone's nerves to be stuck in Asgore's rom-coms. And what we quickly begin to realize is this, once we begin looking at dark horrors, edgy cartoons, rom-coms, we realize that the Dreamer family is indeed fractured. All of their potentially favorite shows all contradict each other. Susie, Kris, and Undyne, on the other hand, all have things that they like that match up pretty well. Now, the fact that everyone in the Dreamer family has presumably different tastes and likes is absolutely fine. That's how most families roll. The problem is the lack of healthy communication and understanding between them. You just have to look at the awkward exchanges between Asgore and Toriel and how Kris gets caught in the middle to realize just how far this family has fallen down the miscommunication rabbit hole. Just like you, in your own life, have to use your words to convince your family to watch that super edgy anime that you're into, or to convince them to watch a cartoon that's really made for little girls, or to sucker them into watching the newest drama Oscar bait starring Tom Hanks. You have to use your words and be invested to keep your family together. And I think that this is going to be central to chapter 3. And again, we'll see how this all plays out through the kinds of shows Kris, Susie, Ralsei have to journey through. Now, a little bit more before I wrap up. Toby is going to have a blast with all of these shows. And in a way, Toby is getting off easy by doing something that so many writers love to do but never follow up on. And that is pitching ideas for bigger stories. It's so easy and fun to come up with the basic ideas and premises for stories, especially television shows or for movies. You can easily throw out there a badass fishwoman detective who uncovers that the Linguini crime family is smuggling out-of-date Apple shampoo and selling it as a liquor during the Great Depression to rowdy, speak loudly proprietress Snickerdoodle Susie. Yep, definite references to the characters right there from Deltarune. Or what if the Titanic was full of a bunch of monsters instead of humans, and the story of Jack and Rose is replaced instead with Asgore and Toriel shoves Asgore off the door in the middle of the Atlantic to make way for Sans? Or, an immortal serial slasher stalks the summer camp run by the students of Alfie's class. Once the students learn, however, that the killer goes after the horniest teen first, and then works down in declining order to murder everyone there at the summer camp, Kris and Susie must work together to keep their friend Noelle alive, staying out of the killer's clutches. Thus begins a bloody, crazy race through the haunted woods as they keep their friend alive, if they can. You see, right here, I just pitched three different story ideas. It's so freaking easy to just come up with something, throw it out there into the ether and say, there's a story. But delivering on those stories, actually making them more than just a simple pitch or idea is another matter entirely. Because, well, any of those ideas could work in theory, but you have to stop and think about how everything from the plot to the characters to the world building to the different tropes, the mechanics, the pacing, and more will come together to tell an engaging story. However, when you decide to tell a story that relies on other stories as references to help push the plot along, you can start having all kinds of fun. The pitches themselves then become the subplots or the plot points to help drive the greater story along without you even having to elaborate or put in all of the work to actually make complete individual stories. You can throw out characters and events as if they're absolute canon, and the audience has to accept them as these completed stories because we don't have any other knowledge to go off on. For example, no one is telling J.K. Rowling that she got the tale from Beetle the Bard wrong about the three brothers. Absolutely not. Why? Because that's her own story. She can reference as little or as much of it as she wants to. The book series Story Thieves can make as many spoofs of famous books and movies as they want because that's canonical to their world. Or the fact that Wreck-It Ralph uses references to all different kinds of video games, both real and not, in order to help move the story along. Those are things that you can do when you have a story that relies on smaller stories that the audience doesn't know to help push things along. Another great example for this would be The Phantom of the Opera. Some of the biggest scenes that actually happen within the musical are other smaller musicals that help to push the plot along. And so you can actually have a whole lot of fun. You're like, haha, I actually don't even have to deliver on any of these bigger story ideas that I'm pitching right here because I can use them as little subplots to help just move things along. It's actually one of the laziest things you can do with a whole bunch of stories, and yet it works. But it only works if they help to encourage strong character development and the advancement of an engaging plot. Otherwise, you're just throwing a bunch of story pitches out there that come together into a weird salad, and you toss it and you hope that you get something good. It's not exactly what we want right here. We want like a good, strong, baked story, which is what I suspect Toby means to do with Chapter 3, which is again why I believe that all of the shows and movies that we are likely to encounter in this television dark world are going to be geared towards the individual characters, what they like, and how that's going to reflect who they are and what kind of arcs they themselves are going on. So with all that being said, that right there, those are my insights, my theory, and some of the ideas that I've pitched for silly, ridiculous things that we might see in the next chapter. And again, I really do want to hear what your pitches are for certain shows or stories that the characters might encounter or might even become a part of in Chapter 3. Please go down to the comments below, have at it, have fun. In the meantime, as we wait for the next chapters of Deltarune to come out, if you're looking for more theories, writing advice, insights, please check out our other videos here on our channel, and we would love it if you would support us by liking, sharing, subscribing to our channel, or even more than that. If you're really willing to help us out, check out the books that we've published. Links for them are in the description below. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us on this crazy adventure that we call writing, and until the next video, y'all, choose.